Hello, everybody. Welcome to the HOJ-Cast episode 18. Felt like it was a good evening to get out a HOJ-Cast for this week. And I'd like to thank Josh, Cardboard Chronicles, for bringing many new listeners to the show after throwing it up on his Instagram stories. And I really don't advise, if you're new, going back and listening to the old ones. Quite frankly, I'm still really getting my footing on these, so just hop in here if you like what we've got going on, and hopefully these will start to get a little bit better and maybe a little more efficient and less long-winded as time rolls on. So here is what we're doing today. I'm going to break this episode up into two parts. The first part is or consists of my thoughts on the 25 and 25 most iconic cards project. And then the second part is going to be a response to a question that was sent into the crossover from Mad City Collector that really deserved more airtime than Josh and I would be able to give it on a crossover episode, or at least I feel that way. And I'm going to I'll tease the topic of that question is basically how do cards that are not visible or not popular gain visibility? How do they enter the stage, so to speak? So that's a tease for what comes there. And that topic dovetails pretty nicely with the iconic stuff. So let's get started. Here's part one. So 25 and 25 is a project that Adam, the Real 27 guy, and Ryan from GemRate collaborated on, which asked collectors in survey form, both so-called experts and members of the collecting community in general, to vote from a predetermined list of cards as to which are the most iconic, subject to the constraint that the cards must be from this millennium, from the last 25 years, so from 2000 to 2025. Hence, they ultimately ended up producing a list of the 25 most highly ranked cards from the last 25 years. And I forget the exact methodology of how they weighted the rankings and stuff like that, but it's out there if you care to look that far. I'm not going to dig too much into the actual results. I'm going to focus on procedure. And I think that procedure is going to give me the most interesting canvas to paint some thoughts on. And then we'll touch on the results a little bit probably, but not much. I think what's much more insightful, what's much more instructive for the collector is just sort of thinking about how do we even approach a topic like this. And I'm going to explain how I approached it. And my approach is certainly not foolproof, and it really was something that I just kind of came up with pretty quickly when I was budgeting time to fill in the list. But just because I came up with it quickly doesn't mean it wasn't sort of the culmination of a lot of different thoughts that I've been developing as a collector. So I do still think there's substance there, and we're going to talk and reason through some of it right now. And there will be flaws. I will make mistakes. You'll see even my own list is terribly flawed, honestly, with several mistakes. But that's not the point. The point isn't to get a perfect list. The point that I want to do here is just sort of to explore the thought process and see where it takes us. So the ambition of this project, like I said, was to identify the 25 most iconic cards of the last 25 years. Or roughly speaking, something along those lines. Or that's roughly how I'm interpreting it. And there may be some nuance there that I'm missing, or it may be the ultimate purpose was maybe I've misused a word or two there, but that's the gist of it. And the first thing that comes to my mind here on this topic is the very first thing that needs to happen is iconic needs to be defined. And let's start there. So first of all, this was how I went about figuring out what iconic means. Iconic, it must mean something more than just being popular or just being in high demand. It must mean something more than just that, because if it didn't, then why use the word iconic? Why not just ask, what are the most popular cards? What are the most commonly owned cards? What are the most graded cards? what card has sold the most over the last X months or X years, which card is worth the most money, which card is listed most often, which card garners the most bids, both in the aggregate and on individual auctions when it comes up, and how many of those bids come from different bidders. And I mean, there's lots of different things that we can measure and that we can actually measure empirically rather than guesstimate. So I took that right away as an invitation to come up with a meaning of iconic that synthesizes multiple ideas, that goes beyond just asking what's popular, that goes beyond asking what's in high demand, because I think we have good ways of measuring that. Iconic must mean something a little bit more, and I'll get into how I defined it briefly, but let me go down the path of a few thoughts here, because heading into this project, I really had come to not like what are traditionally thought of as iconic cards. And when I say iconic, I mean in the when iconic is, I think sometimes the word iconic is used as a substitute for high demand or popular or widely owned. And if that's all that iconic means, and I don't think it is, but if that's all that iconic means, then I'd I certainly had been developing an aversion as a collector for many years to iconic cards. I don't find it appealing on a collector level to own a card that thousands and thousands of other people own. I find the opposite to be appealing on the collector level. I want to seek out the very most elusive cards. I want to seek out the very most unobtainable cards. That's sort of the end goal of my ambition as a collector, is to get the card that is absolutely most out of reach, and get the most difficult to acquire card that I could possibly get my hands on. And difficult to acquire is a proxy for several things. I mean, one of the biggest obstacles to acquiring a card is or can be its value. Because let's say you have a very obscure one of one card, but it's not worth anything, and so if you do find it, you can very easily procure it just by coming over the top with a strong offer. So the thing that actually magnifies or makes most difficult the pursuit of a card is when that card is not only hidden away somewhere and you have no idea where it is. That certainly adds to the allure, but also the price being quite difficult as well. And I am a person of quite limited means, and of practical obligations to everyday life, and so there's plenty of cards that are obtainable strictly on a price level, so unobtainable on a price level so alone. So I really need, everything I'm saying is subject to what I'm capable of, right? So there is some card that is the most difficult card for me to find and to be able to afford, that still is within the realm of what my budget permits. And then there are cards even beyond that. So, but I want to stretch, my collector ambition is to stretch my limit to go as absolutely far as possible to obtain the most unobtainable card for me. So, having sketched that idea, and that's a complex idea, right? Because it's sort of, there are certain players that I collect, and so there's some cards that just wouldn't apply to. So like let's say a 1952 Topps Mantle PSA 10 is one of the most unobtainable cards. Let's just stipulate to that, or at least from a price level it is. I think we know where at least some of them are, but some of the three, but from a price level it's most unobtainable. But I don't have an interest in owning that card. So there is that subjective dimension to it too. So sort of, as long as it's of a player that I collect, or that I really want to collect, and it's a card that's but anyway, without going too far afield, there's this general idea, even if I haven't perfectly expressed it, even if I haven't perfectly thought it through, there's this idea that the unobtainable, the most difficult card to get, is the one that appeals to me the most. And the nature of an iconic card is, or at least the nature of a very popular, widely acknowledged, widely owned card is the total opposite of that. A lot of times, the card that is described as the most iconic or the most popular, the most in demand, it has thousands and thousands of copies. And this is where an understanding of the concept of network effect is instructive. So the network effect is the idea that, especially in the context of sports cards, that the more people that own a card, the more advocates that card has, and the more people in whose self-interest it is to promote that card and to champion its virtues and to share far and wide the advantages and the perks of owning the card. And network effects can happen on a smaller level, like a card numbered out of 10 or something, a gold prism. There are, if you own one, there are 9 other owners out there extolling its virtues, singing its praises. Or if we're talking about something like the Michael Jordan 1986 number 57 Fleer, there are thousands and thousands of people who own it and then who reinforce its desirability by sharing its gospel with all their collector friends. And so there's the network effect. There's this idea that the more popular a card becomes, the more people that own copies of the card, the stronger people pay for copies of that card, the further entrenched their interests are in ensuring that this card's popularity stays at its level or increases, and so on and so forth. So you can see how network effects can impact a card's popularity in a self-reinforcing fashion, if that makes sense. Sort of that the more people who come to own a copy of a card, and especially who come to own it at a valuable price, the louder the chorus will get, and the larger the chorus will get of people who are advocating for or promoting that card. And that's almost one of the shortfalls of leaving, but also one of the great advantages of using the survey method to identify which cards are the most iconic, is that it's a platform through which self-interest can be served. And it can, and even though self-interest is being served, it could be, it might not be through any manipulative or devious fashion or self-serving fashion. It might just be a genuine expression of, or a genuine byproduct of the natural functioning of the psychological mechanisms of the network effect, right? This is natural, or natural might be a bit too strong, but this is something that tends to emerge in group settings, in group psychology. So I've painted the picture here of a popular, widespread, widely recognized card contrasted against a very elusive, unobtainable card. And there's a split on the unobtainable side. So you can have 2 different types of unobtainable. I mean, you can have many types, but you can have the very rare. You can have the very rare version of an iconic card, the very rare parallel of, let's say, of an iconic card, or you can have a very rare edition, an equally rare edition of a not so iconic or a not so popular base card, a not so in demand base version. So let me make up a hypothetical that doesn't actually exist to try and illustrate the point. So let's just take Michael Jordan, PC player of mine. Suppose that one of the more notable years of basketball products is 2018-19. And let's say that Jordan happened to have a Prism Black 1 of 1. Prism is a very popular, widely acknowledged, widely owned base set, and same goes for several of the parallels. Let's say that Michael Jordan has a Black 1 of 1, and then let's compare that to a far lesser known, less popular, less demand, less widely owned base set. Let's go with Spectra. So let's say that let's just stipulate for the purpose of this example that Jordan has just the one one of one parallel to 2219 Prism, even though I know in reality there are two. There's a nebula also, but let's just say for the sake of this that there's just one. It's the black one of one to Prism. And then let's say that Michael Jordan also has a Spectra nebula one of one, and that's a one of one also. So here we're comparing two cards of equal rarity. And let's further stipulate that the cards are equal aesthetically as well. So really the distinguishing factor here is the popularity of the card underneath of the base version and of the silver or the next most rare version of it and so forth. And so here this sort of paints the example of how you can have a card that is a grail version of a very popular base version, and then you can have a card that's equally rare and equally as beautiful as the parallel to the more popular set, but in this case it's just not as popular. It's not as widely owned, it's not as widely recognized, it's not as in demand. And so sort of we've isolated here that the difference is the popularity of the base version. So you can have these different types of grail versions. You can have something that parallels a much more popular base set and one that doesn't. So let me throw a thought experiment at you here, because something I struggled with as I think this through is my aversion to iconic so-called cards, or more specifically my aversion to popular or high demand cards, my aversion to widely owned cards collapses at the level of, let's say, the one of one parallel. And so now, I'm wrestling with a card that's going to be more difficult to obtain, or is certainly more expensive if it parallels a popular base version. And I'm contrasting it with a card that's equally as rare, equally as beautiful, but parallels a far less popular base version, a base version that's less in demand. And so that card naturally is going to be much, much, much cheaper in the market. And that bothers me a little bit. That price difference, or it's maybe it doesn't bother me. It's just, but it fascinates me. It's a curiosity. So I think to myself, how do we analyze why paralleling a popular base set makes a one of one much, much, much more valuable than a card that we've stipulated is equally as beautiful and is equally as rare, but just parallels a far less popular base set? And so this is where I'm going to introduce the Omniscient collector's thought experiment. So suppose that there is a room that is completely walled off from the outside world, and within it, we have brought in a table full of omniscient collectors. Let's just say 10. And by omniscient collectors, I mean collectors who know everything there is to know about every card that has ever been made, and about every player who is featured on every card. These are all-knowing collectors. They know everything that there is to know about every card. So they aren't subject to a limited purview that that the only products that they ever really engage with or experience are just Prism and Select and Optic and NT and Flawless and Immaculate, and sort of that's their whole worldview. But instead they have an equal knowledge of all of the different product offerings. So they know as much about Prism as they do about Spectra. They know as much about Hoops and Donruss as they do about Flawless and Immaculate. They know about Impeccable. They know about all the different product offerings. They know all the parallels. They know how rare each parallel is. They know all the players. They know all the players' accolades. They are omniscient. And suppose that they were to sit down at a table and they were to argue or discuss their preferences with respect to deciding, which cards they like the best. And what makes this insightful, or the thing that this thought experiment is focusing on, is that we're removing ignorance or limited access to information or susceptibility to hype. These are people who are isolated in this room. They have perfect knowledge, and they aren't beholden to for an example, network effects. I mean, they're isolated. They're simply examining these cards on their merits, stripped away of I'm trying to design a situation that strips away hype, the noise and the bias of the outside world, the whimsical nature of consensus that occasionally happens, the problems of building consensus upon, sort of marketing campaigns and promotional slogans rather than on the intrinsic qualities of the card. And so what would these omniscient collectors decide? How would they rank cards? How would they rank the Prism Black 1 of 1 against the Spectra Nebula 1 of 1, especially since we've stipulated that these cards are of equal beauty and of equal rarity? So how would they rank them? And the thought experiment is sort of designed to suggest that they might rank them equally. And so the popularity, the demand, the iconic, the widespread acknowledgement of the underlying base version of these 1 of 1s is doing a ton of market work, especially when you get multiples where this one of 1 is worth 50 times the next one. I have this imbalance in my own collection. I don't mean imbalance in a pejorative sense. I mean it in a purely empirical sense, that there is an imbalance. There's a 50x value multiplier or whatever, or even larger. So like I think about my Jokic collection. I have his Prism Black 1 of 1 rookie, which is a 1 of 1 of 1. And then I've also got, for example, his Donruss Black 1 of 1 rookie, which is also a 1 of 1 of 1. But the value spread between those two, I don't know, it could even be hundreds of X. It could be, I don't know how large it is, but I think it's massive. And I do think the Prism looks nicer. I don't know, I like the chrome, Optichrome stock. I like the shininess. The Donruss is paper, and it doesn't have much shine at all. But it's got a really cool photo. I certainly like the photo of the Donruss better than I like the photo of the Prism Black, but that's partially an artifact of Prism actually being the first base set to issue a Jokic card in a Nuggets uniform, a fully licensed Jokic card. Prism is the first base set. There's actually a different set. I think it's the acetate acetate rookies insert or something from Prestige. I believe that's Jokic's first card ever, but that's an insert. I was just doing this research the other day. So his first ever Nuggets uniform card is that acetate rookies, which I'm pretty sure is from Prestige. But I am certain that his first ever base set card is that Prism one. So they used a photo from Summer League in that on that Prism card. And it's a cool photo, especially when you photo match it. That video has been photo matched and it's out there, and he's making this cool little scoop shot, finger roll thing after putting on some nice, Olajuwon-esque footwork against his defender. But I certainly like the photo on the Donruss more. The photo on the Donruss shows him elevating over Giannis, who's probably his closest competitor and rival, at least from an accolades and greatness point of view, among players in this era, among players from his era. So anyway, there's interesting comparisons there, but at the end of the day, the Prism ends up being many multiples more valuable than the Donruss. And the Omniscient Collectors experiment is sort of designed to figure out how much of that is because of hype and popularity of the underlying base set, how much of that is due to network effects, how much of that is due to sort of the group psychology, and how much of that is because of the intrinsic properties of the cards if Omniscient Collectors actually set them down side by side and were ranking them. And so I've sort of come up with kind of like a Rawlsian veil of ignorance that applies to the collector setting. And there are problems with my thought experiment, just like there are problems with the Rawlsian veil of ignorance. Namely, so like the reply to the Rawls, Nozick's reply to Rawls' veil of ignorance, or to any attempt to sort of reset resources in society, is that even if you reset resources, the inequity is going to build right back up again. And Nozick's famous example is Wilt Chamberlain. So he sort of says, look, even if we perfectly redistributed all the wealth in the society, and then we released all of ourselves back into the public and sort of said, okay, go. That Wilt Chamberlain is going to pick up a basketball and start drawing crowds of tens and tens of thousands of people to watch him. And that's going to accumulate quite a bit of revenue, and he's going to command a nice share of it. And the wealth disparity is going to recur quickly. That's a passage from political science, and particularly the back and forth of these late Enlightenment thinkers, Rawls and Nozick in particular. Nozick's example, I think, can be found in his book Anarchy, State, and Utopia, and Rawls's book that lays out the Veil of Ignorance thought experiment is a theory of justice, I think. Okay, so then applying that to the context of cards, the reply to my omniscient collectors thought experiment is that, well, who's to say that all these collectors are going to have the same preferences as each other? So I've sort of tried to control for beauty, but if these collectors ultimately have to make a decision, and they're all going to have different aesthetic preferences, they're not copies of each other, they're unique people. They're going to find one of the cards to be more beautiful than the other, and one of them is going to find the appeal of a particular brand and its lineage to be more compelling than the other, and they're going to differentiate these cards. And so what I said, maybe there's 10 or there's 10 omniscient collectors. Well, what if 8 of them just still end up preferring the Prism to the Spectra and the Michael Jordan thought experiment that I was given? What if 8 of them still prefer the Prism? And then when you have 8 bidding or pursuing one, let's take it to the next step and say they stop ranking, and now they're throwing their resources around to try and build up the best collection, or build up the collection they want to build up. Now the ones who are going after, there's 8 going after the Prism Black Michael Jordan 1 of 1. There's just 2 chasing the Spectra Nebula 1 of 1. So it's probably going to be the case that the Prism price is going to run away. And then once it does start to run away, the separation between the Prism through the mechanism of price being established as the best out of these two, then what if once something does get sort of established as the best, what if everybody wants the best? Now all 10 have migrated over to pursuing the Black 1 of 1 once the social proof has been issued. So just in the same way that sort of, if we set everybody's resources to equal, but the inequalities are still going to arise out of people's different talents and abilities, so too, if we put all the cards on the table and let the omniscient collectors decide, eventually they are going to decide. There is going to be subjective preference expressed at bottom when ranking cards. Even if we're reasoning very carefully, we still have to sort of posit an arbitrary axiom or first principle from which to start, and that's a topic for a later episode. But hopefully you understand what I mean by that. In any value system, the core value is just an expression of will. It's subjective, and so sort of the thought there is that it's quite possible that a consensus still emerges, and that the Wilt Chamberlain of these two cards will stand out and still will accumulate more resources, and the imbalance will be restored, and then that can create a runaway effect, and so on and so forth. But still, I think so. Anyway, but I think the thought experiment's interesting. I think it's something worth thinking about. I think even no matter how that ultimately plays out in your mind, or how it would ultimately play out if we were to have it happen, that just the process of thinking that through can be instructive on a number of levels. So let me wrap up these prefatory first 30 minutes of theorizing about whether or not I like iconic cards and what or more specifically popular in-demand cards. And I think that's a good place to stop there, is with that thought experiment and sort of the problems of the omniscient collector thought experiment. And now let me move forward here to ultimately, how did I end up defining iconic card so that it means something more than popular or in demand or widely owned? Because as I alluded to earlier, if that's all that it means, then there's really no need for me. We can measure which cards are most widely owned. We can measure, I went through all the examples earlier, just which has the most bids, so on and so forth. We can measure those things. So my contribution to this as a collector must be to give a meaning, to give a definition to iconic that synthesizes ideas and that makes the collector's point of view, that imbues the nature of iconic with something that isn't so easily measured, and those measurables can factor in, or my estimation of those measurables can factor in, but I'll be synthesizing several different things, and maybe that's how the collector can add something to the discussion. And so here's how I decided to define iconic. I said an iconic card has 3 components, and these components are all factors, right? They're not they all admit of degrees. So we're the most iconic card would fully 100% check each of these 3 boxes, but no card probably will be a perfect encapsulation of it. So there's going to be degrees and sort of a balancing act of figuring out, if we wanted to say which is the most iconic cards, or which fulfills these 3 the most on the whole. So the 3 factors of an iconic card are: 1, that it depicts a popular and admired athlete; 2, that it is in high demand; and 3, that it has a grail parallel that is extremely rare, ideally a 1 of 1. So let's break that down quickly. So first of all, an iconic card should depict a popular and admired athlete. So here is sort of the popularity factor, and this is narrowly tailored to the sports card arena and not trading card, not TCG stuff or characters, but in the context of athletes. I'm putting forth the idea that an iconic card must depict a popular and admired athlete. And one sort of thinks like, well, maybe there's a counterexample. Maybe you could have a very iconic card that isn't popular because of its athlete, but just because of what it is as a card, and that is possible. But I needed to come up with a definition, and I wanted the definition, at least for the way that to reflect the way that I approach as a collector. And the way that I approach it as a collector is that the variable of the subject of the card, the variable of who the athlete is, matters a lot. And so, at least to me, the iconic nature of a card requires a popular and admired athlete. Then we have the second factor, which is that the card itself is in high demand. And this is just like the first factor. This is also my concession to what I perceive the word iconic means in the setting of the sports card hobby. This is the demand portion of it. So there are definitely a lot of ways to measure demand. We can look at population reports. We can look at pricing. We can look at bid activity. We can look at transaction volume. There's lots of different stuff we can look at. And so, I sort of approximate this by my experience, by, approximating what I observe in my daily collecting life and what I have observed over the years collecting. And then the third and final factor, the grail parallel, that it has an apex version, that ideally a 1 of 1. This is my unique contribution. This is definitely the most controversial part of this definition. This is the part that I think most people would disagree with. I think people will also disagree with part 1, that the athlete needs to be popular and admired. But I think there's people who will definitely disagree with part 3, which is that in order for a card to be iconic, it must have a 1 of 1, very elusive grail tier parallel, or something close to it. But the reason why I want this in the nature of iconic is because to me, the aspect of having the grail tier card, what that adds to the idea of iconic is it adds the castle on the hill dimension. It adds it's the artist. It's the equivalent of the artist who is brilliant and expresses a terrific idea through their art that nobody else could express, and that captures a sentiment or a moment in time that only they are capable of. So there is a nature, there is something in the essence of what it means to be iconic that is this is this greatness, this grandiosity, that iconic. It isn't merely popularity and widespread recognition, but it's also greatness. That iconicity is tied up in 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 widespread recognition and popularity and demand, but also in something transcendent, in something awe-inspiring, and in something beautiful, and something brilliant, and something in something special, in something impressive, and so on. And that's the dimension of iconic that I sort of want to infuse the discussion with. At least that's how I sort of start to find the discussion of what's iconic in sports cards interesting, is when that property is added in. And once that property is added in, now all of a sudden I'm interested in the exercise, and I'm interested in seeing what I can bring to it as a collector, having tugged on and pulled out that part of its nature. Okay, so with that definition in hand of what an iconic card is, here's how I actually applied it to my particular ranking. And what I have on the screen is not this visual that I have on the screen that I've had on the screen the whole time. This is not my ranking. This is the result, the average result that that Adam and Ryan ended up publishing after they aggregated all of the responses. That this is how things ended up. My list is different. Definitely has overlap, but my list is different. And I think I made some mistakes in compiling my list. I definitely made some mistakes in compiling my list, even mistakes in the sense that I didn't even properly execute my own theories. But I hadn't thought about it nearly as deeply until I actually decided it might make good fodder for a podcast. And then I started really digging into it. And as I fleshed it out, I realized that I definitely made some errors. But anyway, here's how I applied that 3-factor test. So this is basically like a 4-step approach, and you'll see how that works. Like as I'm going card by card, looking at the original menu that they provided us, which was maybe around 110 or 120 cards, in that ballpark, I think. And then we were to filter and rank just the top 25, 1 through 25. So the first thing I would do is I would say, what do I think that other collectors think are the most important, popular, and admired athletes? Okay, so that's first of all. I'm looking around the hobby. I'm thinking about who I've talked to. Who do these other collectors think are the most popular and admired athletes? And I'm tethering this I'm tethering it to measurable accolades and my perception of sort of social media and news, sports coverage relevance. So like, I can very easily look up accolades, and then I have a decent sense of coverage of these athletes across more mainstream outlets. And then I also just certainly have a sense of what I see on social media, what people say when I talk to them at card shows, what all my different collector friends express opinion wise about which players are most popular and admired. And then add on to that the fact that I'm limiting the sample of athletes to those who had their rookie season sometime in the last 25 years. So sometime between the year 2000 and the year 2025. Okay, then here's part 2. All right, so that now we have the pool of athletes. They need to be in the mind of collectors, or at least how I perceive the mind of collectors to be, the most popular and admired athletes who were a rookie in the last 25 years. All right, so then I go on to step 2, which is I'm going to limit myself to picking just 1 or 2 cards of these most popular and admired athletes from the predetermined sample. So if they are very popular and very admired, then I'll give them 2 cards. And if they're popular and admired, but not at the highest level, I'll give them 1. And so if I flip over to actually my list real quick, the way that played out was, here are the guys who got 2 cards. LeBron got 2 cards. Patrick Mahomes got 2 cards. Tom Brady got 2 cards. Steph Curry got 2 cards. Shohei Ohtani got 2 cards. Luka Doncic got 2 cards. So I guess that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I guess that's 6. Somehow in my hand I counted 7. That's 6 athletes. Don't ever ask me to count things on my fingers, I guess. But 6 athletes there who were popular and admired enough in the minds of other collectors, as I perceive it, to get 2 cards. And then I rounded out the list with these athletes who I found were popular and admired, but not enough to get 2 cards on the list. Instead, they just got 1 card on the list. And they are Aaron Judge, Mike Trout, Nikola Jokic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Bryce Harper, Albert Pujols, Aaron Rodgers, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Connor McDavid, Alex Ovechkin, and Sidney Crosby. All right. So, I mean, and look, those are the names I came up with. You know, am I right in how popular and admired these athletes are in the mind of fellow collectors? I mean, I probably made some mistakes here. But we're not done yet. So though I've been through the first 2 steps of this process, but now let's get to the third here, because you're probably wondering why certain people are omitted. And the final 2 steps here did knock out some people who otherwise meet the criteria. So step 3 is that if the particular player is admired and popular, but they just don't have any cool cards, if they just have 0 cards that are in high demand, that's going to knock cards of that athlete down the list. So there are people who didn't make the top 25, but would be like 33rd on my list or something like that. So that's one thing, is that you can have a very popular and admired athlete, but they just didn't get any good cards for whatever reason, maybe because their sport didn't have great coverage card-wise or whatever the case may be. And then 4th and final step, and then even if you have a player who is popular and admired and they have a very high demand card, if that high demand card doesn't have an apex or a grail parallel, or if it doesn't have anything that's really close, right? Like it doesn't need to be a 1 of 1, but there should be a grail parallel. If it doesn't even have that, then that's going to knock the card down my list too. So that's how something like Messi's 2004 cards ended up not making my list, which still might be a mistake. Because you could certainly argue that Messi's 04 cards don't have parallels, but they sure do have condition rarity. So they sure do have low pop gem rates, and then low pop gem offerings. The gem rate is very low, I should say, and also they have rarity in other ways. You can add an aftermarket autograph and create a very rare subset of the card, sort of a very rare version of the card that way too. So I probably should have thought about maybe expanding the concept to not, if a rare version or a rare parallel of the card, including condition scarcity or aftermarket autograph imposed scarcity. And then if that were the case, then Messi's mega cracks would certainly make this list. And then the other pushback is that Messi's 2014 Prism, that should have made the list too. And I think maybe the place where that card might suffer the most is just, I'm not quite sure if the demand for its base version is quite as high as the demand for these other cards, partially because the 2014 Prism wouldn't be a rookie year card. And but maybe that's changed. I certainly think there's the demand for the more rare versions, as that being one of Messi's very best cards. And I think privately some very high sales have been achieved for the rarest versions of that card quite recently. So maybe Messi should have been on here, honestly, as an athlete with 2 cards, and those 2 being the mega cracks, if we allow, because that card certainly has the demand. It's just the dimension along which it runs into a little bit of trouble is having that grail parallel. But if we treat condition scarcity as creating that grail parallel, then it makes it. And then also the 2014 Prism, which I'm not so sure how much in demand its base version is. Maybe it's in high demand, or maybe that demand has even changed since doing this list a few months ago. But yeah, I think that's one of my big mistakes here in my list is that Messi probably should have been represented, and he probably should have got those 2 cards on here. If I had to do it over, I'd put them on there. Having talked this through, having thought about it. But this list is full of mistakes, so the list sucks. It's certainly flawed. Okay, so I've sort of gone through how I applied it. I gave you the athletes, and then I gave you them in order. So sort of this list in a certain sense, it's architected around the athlete first, and then it sort of starts adding requirements from there. So sort of like I'm sort of ranking it in the way that I see the popularity of the athletes, but athletes can sort of come up and down, 1 or 2 spots in either direction depending upon their cards. And it's not just the popularity of the athlete. I'm also sort of looking at the admiration of the athlete too, popularity and admiration. And so that's sort of how you get LeBron at the top. I went Topps Chrome first and Exquisite second. And already you can say, well, the Topps Chrome's rarest parallel is a gold out of 50. So that's quite a ways away from having a 1 of 1 parallel. And that's true. But, in terms of the high demand of the base version, I think you're going to be hard pressed to find a more in demand base card of the last 25 years than the 03 Topps Chrome LeBron. So it really scores quite highly along that second dimension, and a popular and admired athlete. LeBron scores as high as anybody on this list on that dimension as well. The place where this card is the weakest is the Grail parallel. And then you get the Exquisite, and there it is in high demand, but not as high demand just because it's out of reach for so many people, right? It's in demand. People would love to. I mean, the demand would explode, I think, if the card cost the same thing. If it costs $5 or $6 grand like the Topps Chrome base does, but it doesn't. It costs hundreds of thousands. So I don't know. The demand is among a smaller number of people. Get at its current price. Because just a very small number can afford it. And then you have the Grail parallel aspect, so it takes a parallel out of 23. And then it also, I believe, has a version that doesn't have the patch or the autograph, but is a 1 of 1. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now, but anyway, so then next up I had Mahomes. I had Mahomes Prism, which I think Mahomes satisfies all these areas quite well. Popular and admired athlete, high demand for his Prism. Not as much for the NT for the same reasons as I discussed with the Exquisite, which is why I think the Prism ends up coming ahead of the NT for Mahomes, and why the Topps Chrome ends up coming ahead for LeBron. And then, but each of these also has the Apex card, the Prism Black Finite, and the NT Shield Autograph Platinum 1 of 1. And so I'm not going to do this experiment for the whole list. All right, you can up next is Brady. I got the Bowman Chrome and the Playoff Contenders for Brady. The big problem there is that both of those cards are quite a ways off from having the Grail parallel. So the Bowman Chrome scores very highly among the first 2 dimensions, but then you get to the Grail and it's just a refractor parallel. But the PSA 10, the Gem Mint version is I think is a pop 7. So if we let condition rarity in, then that starts to help. The Contenders rarest version is out of 100. That's getting closer to an Apex, Grail type of card, but it's still a ways off from having a 1 of 1. So that sort of knocked the Brady. That's why I think I have the Mahomes over the Brady, is just along that third dimension, that Grail dimension. Then we went to Curry with Topps Chrome and NT. Curry's Topps Chrome does have the Super Refractor 1 of 1. Then we get to Bowman Chrome and Bowman Chrome Auto for Ohtani. And then we get to Luka, Prism, and NT. Then we get to Bowman Chrome with Judge, Bowman Chrome with Trout, Prism with Jokic, Prism with Giannis, and off we go. All right, so that's then. Let's just take a look here at the final results, and for the podcast audience, I'll give you the let's do the top few here. So Brady Contenders ended up being first, the most iconic card. LeBron Exquisite RPA ended up being second. Curry Tops, and the way that this I should have mentioned this certainly, but the way that this worked too, and I think Adam and Ryan certainly factored in that third prong that I'm thinking quite a bit about, the Grail parallel, is that when you voted for a card, you voted for it and all of its parallels. So when you voted for the Contenders, you also voted for the champ ticket. If you voted for the LeBron Exquisite RPA, you also voted for its gold out of 23. If you voted for the Topps Curry, you also got the Topps Chrome and the Topps Superfractor and so on. So anyway, third was the Topps Curry. Fourth is the LeBron Topps Chrome. Fifth is the Brady Bowman Chrome. Sixth is the Luka Prism. Seventh is the Trout Topps. 8 is the Curry NT. 9 is the Messi Mega Cracks. 10 is the Trout Bowman Chrome Super. Or I'm sorry, just the Bowman Chrome. They put a picture of the Super. 11 is the Mahomes Prism. 12 is the Tiger Woods Upper Deck. And then enough. So I encourage all to go look at the results. But I don't think the results aren't as compelling to me. What is compelling to me is the exercise of thinking about these things carefully and seeing what I can learn about myself as a collector, and what I can learn about what I like, and also just think more carefully about collecting as a whole. That's what I found to be really rewarding about this experience. And then thinking it through, talking it through, and all of the spillover effects from that process. Okay. Tip of the hat to those guys for a pretty cool project that they put together, and that ended up being quite insightful for me as I thought through it and made mistakes. And and still certainly there's more thinking to be done and ideas to be ironed out. But yeah, if you can blame Ryan and Adam for the birth of the Omniscient Collector thought experiment. All right, let's get on to part 2 of this episode. Part 2 is inspired by a collection from Mad City Collector that he actually sent in to the Crossover podcast live show last Friday, and I put it at the end of the questions, but we didn't quite get to it, and besides, I felt like we weren't going to have enough time to give it the ample weight and exploration that a question like this deserves. And instead, what I'll do is I'll read the question first, and then I'm going to use this to sort of to help the new listeners that Josh has sent my way, to help those listeners catch up without having to listen to previous episodes. So something that I was thinking about doing for this episode was I was thinking about going to ChatGPT, cramming in my transcripts from the first 17 episodes that I've done, asking ChatGPT to pull out the best insights from each of those episodes, and then I would recap it. And I would, GPT says that the most interesting thing said in episode 5 is this, and then I would just, save you the time of having to listen to the hours of rambling and just sort of cut through and get the best part from each episode. But I started doing that, and it was just, honestly, it was a little bit boring, and I also it was hard to put myself back in the mindset of those episodes and fully fleshing out ideas. And so I ultimately abandoned that project. But before I abandoned it, I did get to prompt GPT to come up with the best nugget from like 10 episodes. I went back as far as 10 before I just got bored with it and quit. And what proves to be very helpful is that the best nugget from 2 of the episodes will answer, or will give me a springboard to answer this question from Mad City Collector. So here's the question from Mad City Collector. Chris brought up the concept of visibility in one of his HOJ-Casts, and how visibility typically leads to popularity in the public consciousness. Often when people speak of iconic cards, they are typically talking about cards with high visibility, which is antithetical to the common perception that rarity is what makes things more popular or desirable. Can you discuss how cards that aren't highly visible reach the public consciousness, and gain mythical status. So some of these ideas were batted around to some degree in the first segment of this episode. But allow me now to bring in a nugget from episode 17 of the HOJ-Cast and a nugget from episode 15 to address this question. And so I'm going to read how GPT summarized back to me portions of my transcript that it found to be the best insightful piece, which is what I asked it to do. And this is just the most insightful piece relative to the other things that were said. I don't mean, it certainly doesn't mean this is the most insightful thing possible. It just means that relative to all the other rambling that I did in the episode, GPT found this part to be the best nugget. Shout out to the nuggets. Okay. So for the nugget from episode 17, GPT called it the permission to compare theory of sentiment change. Permission to compare. So GPT says that this idea of permission to compare and slow sentiment change reframes market ranking as a two-step process. The first step being granting legitimacy so that something can be compared to its peers. And the example I gave is how the 84 star was very slowly, but over time granted the legitimacy. The door was opened to allow it to be compared to the 86 Fleer and sort of what some of the results, the consequences of that were. So that's the first step is a card gets permission, or it gains the legitimacy required to be able to be compared against the most popular cards, that's able to be seen in the same category. And sort of the mechanism that kept the 84 star out for a long time was that it wasn't pack issued, or excuse me, that it wasn't blind pack issued. It did come in a sealed wrapper, but they were team bags. You knew exactly which cards were coming, and there was sort of something about the blind pack and the sort of the thrill of the blind pack, that any person can open a blind pack and end up getting that Michael Jordan card, that you don't know what you're buying. There's a democratizing effect that has, that a 5-year-old or a 50-year-old can open up that pack and they have the same shot at getting the Michael Jordan. And this blind pack nature was something that sort of separated categorically the 84 star and the 86 Fleer. But once that categorical, or once that threshold nature of the blind pack fell away, and it just sort of became a variable, but one of many to consider. When that shift happened, and I go in that episode, I go into depth sort of about some of the reasons why I think it happened. The internet being a big one, and sort of the removal or the replacement of sort of monolithic, singular voice, authoritative content, which took the form of publications. And it was replaced by this comment section style, collector, community-driven, grassroots, ground-up approach, and then the access to sales history and images and stuff. The access and the removal of when I open up my Beckett magazine and I see XRC next to one and I see RC next to the other, sort of those things went away, and then it was just sort of replaced by this pile of sales history results. And anyway, there's a lot of ways that sort of this card, the 84 star, was allowed to enter the fore. So that's step one, is sort of the card needs to somehow become, it needs to enter the stage. It needs to be given the permission to enter the stage. The 84 star was a very complex and difficult entry, overcoming a lot to get there. And I don't think that's actually the case for most. I think a lot of times granting visibility is really as simple as just putting it on people's radar. I think it really can be that simple. I think to give a great example, my brother put together an insert set the very first year of Select's Starcade insert in football. He put together the gold out of 10, the entire set. It's a very cool project. If you ask him, how did he discover this insert set? He saw a reel on Instagram. He saw a reel that a breaker made that was the breaker was promoting Select, and they said, look at these Starcade inserts. These are really cool. Tied it to pop culture. And he just liked the way they looked, and he liked the way they were presented, and he liked the checklist, and he just went after it. And it was just somebody put it in front of him. Somebody created the visibility, and then that's all that it took. All that it took was the visibility. All it took was somebody putting it on his radar, and he did the rest. So visibility, I just think, just getting the card on stage, and then allowing its properties to do the rest. And storytelling helps too, like, or the thematic nature that Starcade, the tie that Starcade has to symbols and pop culture and stuff like that, helps too. But yeah, visibility, granting permission, getting it on stage in a way that that sees the card as an equal to other cards, or equally able to be considered among other cards. So that's the first step. The second step is the slow, rational recomputation over time. So the second step is just sort of emphasizing that the change is going to be tends to be very gradual and slow, and that there's so much incentive to defend the status quo. So this kind of goes back to network effects, which were discussed in the first section. That's when people own cards, they have an enormous incentive to defend them and to spread the good word about them to other people. They have a financial incentive to do that. They also just have a psychological incentive to do that. That they will feel like they made the right decision if they see other people following in their footsteps. And when other people follow in their footsteps, the value is likely to go up if the demand increases and the supply stays the same, or the supply even goes down as more people want it. That means more people put them away. That means there's less to go around, less are available, less are in the float. So there, and then from there, supply and demand, the very basic microeconomic analysis there suggests prices will go up too. So thinking about sort of network effects, that's one of the barriers, one of the obstacles to a change in sentiment, to letting a card gain legitimacy, is that it will have to do battle with people who are not interested in seeing it get on the stage. They would rather see the stage filled with the cards that they collect and the things that they already like, even if there's a decent chance or a high probability that they'll like the new thing. They'll like the thing that hadn't previously been on stage. Maybe the thing that hadn't previously been on stage is even resonates with them more than anything that they currently have, but they're just ignorant of it. But even then, you can see that the incentive will be strong for them, perhaps to fight most vociferously, most passionately, to fight most violently against the thing that strikes them as the most appealing, because that thing also is the greatest threat to their entrenched interests. But just because there are these obstacles, that doesn't mean that they're impenetrable. But it does mean that it will require lots of visibility. It will require, or it will have the expectation of very slow, gradual change. It won't happen fast. It will take time. It will have to do battle against entrenched interests. It will struggle against the externalities of network effects. But it can happen. The 84 stars is proof that it can happen. And what else does GPT say here? So GPT says that the reason why this is the best nugget from episode 17 is that it's explanatory and it's generalizable. So value hierarchies do not flip through hot takes. They move only after the community first grants comparative legitimacy, and then over long cycles lets the transparent variables, things like which card comes first chronologically, which card is rarer, what brand does each card come from, and so forth. These variables then are allowed to actually be compared. And that goes well beyond Star versus Fleer. It's a blueprint for how any niche lane can earn standing for itself. And it reconciles the bull market's act now pressure with the reality that taste and status evolve very slowly. All right, so that's, I think, a pretty good stab at the question that Mad City Collector was asking about how how do you can you discuss how cards that are not highly visible can reach the public consciousness and gain mythical status? That's certainly one way. And then there's also a nugget from episode 15. So the insight that GPT identified from episode 15 is it called conditioning the gut, or conditioning one's gut, parentheses, agency over taste. Okay, what does that mean? So the gut, your gut instinct, your visceral reaction to things, your aesthetic tastes, they aren't fixed. Your gut sense, it's not predetermined, it's not fully deterministic. You can train it. You can rewire your mind, your taste, your preferences. You can retrain that. You can rewire that. You can train that to some degree. And then the mechanism through which to do that is by curating in your inputs, by curating very carefully what you read, what you watch, what you consume, and by doing your own research as a substitute, building out your own checklists, understanding for yourself, becoming the omniscient collector, understanding for yourself, which the full available offering of cards. And then sort of as you very carefully decide what content impacts your perception and what doesn't, and you do the research for yourself, you can really take control of that natural moment that comes later, that moment that comes when you're not expecting it, where something jumps out to you and it gives you the aha moment, the jolt of inspiration. You can actually train yourself to lead to discoveries that are predicated upon inputs that you've carefully cultivated, as opposed to just passively consuming social media content, passively consuming the loudest voices who are shouting at you on social media or in content creation, and just sort of being unaware and sort of passively letting those things come into your mind on all levels of consciousness. Okay, so GPT continues that it's a powerful synthesis that the passion at the moment of purchase is preceded by months of intentional cognitive framing. It says that collectors can engineer their future intuitions by curating inputs and building their own hobby taxonomies today. And it reframes taste as a tractable variable, not a mystery force. That insight unifies the episode's themes and offers a practical playbook. So you can design your information diet, you can construct your own spreadsheets, you can have a lot to say about what your next aha moment is going to look like. So that also, I think, is responsive to Mad City Collector's question, which is, but it sort of speaks more to something that's embedded in his question but not explicit, which is, well, which cards should we think about entering the stage that aren't currently on the stage? And I think the way that we go about finding those, if they do exist, because it's also always possible, especially in a particular domain, a particular niche, a particular silo of collecting, that the stage is already full with the right players. The stage is already full with the right actors and actresses, and that there's really that there's nothing left to do here. I mean, or at least that's possible. There's nothing left to bring to light. So that should always be considered too. But the way to sort of find the things to bring to light. So Mad City Collector is sort of pointing towards rarity, sort of like he's hinting, gesturing in the direction of Michael Jordan's Spectra 1 of 1 from 2018, to go back to the thought experiment from part 1. Sort of like, here's this very rare card, which seems really desirable, right? Or at least it should be. He says rarity is what makes things more popular or desirable. I'm not sure if rarity makes them more popular. Definitely makes them more desirable. But I can see how he would get to that if it's more desirable because it's rare, it will be popular. What's desirable is what's popular. What's rare is what's desirable. So I see that leap there. I see the connection that's being made. And so the idea is, like, how does that Spectra get onto the stage? And then, but there's even a step before that, which is, are we sure that the only card that should be on the stage along with the Prism Black is the Spectra nebula? Or are there other ones that we're missing too? And that sort of goes back to becoming the omniscient collector, becoming the person who has at their fingertips the full menu of cards. So let me wrap it up there. I wanna call it here. Appreciate you guys listening. Hope this was an enjoyable episode. It's been episode 18 of the Chris HOJ-Cast. See you guys for the next one.